Well, welcome. I want to welcome everyone to the opt-in code, what it could mean for new buildings in Wellesley. I'm Mary Beth Martello, the Town of Wellesley's Sustainability Director. And next slide. And what brings us here today is Article 36, to see if the town will adopt the municipal opt-in specialized energy code, what we're lovingly calling tonight the opt-in code. And that article is co-sponsored by the Climate Action Committee and the Select Board. Next slide. So our agenda tonight is going to start with just some quick meeting protocol points. Then we're going to take a look at Wellesley's climate goals in relation to the opt-in code, take a deeper dive into code provisions, and then talk about passive house and multifamily projects, as well as high performance buildings, especially homes. We'll end with a Q&A segment, so I encourage you to generate your questions because we have a tremendous panel with us tonight. Next slide. And we're recording the meeting. We will distribute that in the next few days. Welcome you to enter comments and questions in the chat, and to, during the Q&A session, to raise your hand with the Zoom raise hand function or submit into the chat. And we ask that you stay muted when not asking a question. Next slide. We are really fortunate tonight to have an illustrious panel of experts. We have Tom Catalano, Principal of Catalano Architects, Mark Doty, Principal of Thought Forms, Nick Falkoff, Principal of Auburndale Builders. Alan Hebert is here. He is Operations Manager for Wellesley's Facilities Management Department. Hank Keating is President of Passive House Massachusetts. Ellen Watts is a fellow at the American Institute of Architects, or AIA. She's also president-elect of AIA Massachusetts, a member of the Boston Society of Architects, and a LEED accredited professional. Joanne Becerra is here as well. She is the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources Green Communities Division Director. Next slide. And the webinar tonight is part of a series of outreach programs that we have been engaging in since October, speaking with boards, meeting and interviewing building professionals one-on-one. We had a very well-attended webinar for building professionals on March 6th. And after tonight's webinar, we will continue to engage up until town meeting begins on March 27th. Next slide. So Wellesley's greenhouse gas emissions goals. We've had townwide goals on the books since 2009. Town meeting most recently revised these goals in 2001. They are a townwide reduction in emissions by 50% below a 2007 baseline by 2030, a 75% reduction by 2040, and to net zero by 2050. Next slide. This is a snapshot of townwide emissions in 2021. You can see that buildings contribute about 60% of emissions. When you look inside that 60%, you see about 37% from the residential sector, 11% each from commercial and colleges, and 2% from municipal buildings. Next slide. This chart shows metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent by energy source. The leftmost bars reflect emissions from buildings. You can see that the biggest emissions come from natural gas, followed by fuel oil and electricity. We have to, back one, sorry. We have to get these bars for the buildings down to net zero. Electricity is already well on its way in that direction because of solar, hydro, and wind, those renewables that are coming onto the grid. But natural gas and fuel oil are only going to go down if we actively reduce the use of those fuel sources. And that's where the building code comes in. And that's why it's so important to reduce these emissions from these sources in our new construction buildings. That's the lower hanging fruit. Next slide. So, steps to net zero buildings are minimize energy use, maximize energy efficiency, electrify appliances and mechanical systems, and power with renewables. These steps underlie Wellesley's Climate Action Plan building section, similar plans at the state level, and you will see them coming out loud and clear in the opt-in code. Next slide. So the Building Energy Code. The Building Energy Code is part of the building code. It's updated every 3 years, and it regulates the energy in buildings. And next slide. So this shows the 3 tiers of energy code that the DOER presented in December of 2022. And you can see that the different levels of code build upon each other, with the base code based on an international code with Massachusetts amendments. As you travel up the pyramid, the requirements become stricter. Next slide. A little bit of history on the stretch code. In 2009, the stretch code became available and designed to be 20 to 35% a greater energy efficiency over the base code. Communities were invited to opt in voluntarily, and Wellesley did so in 2011. The Climate Act of 2021 moved the authority for the energy code to the Department of Energy Resources, DOER. In 2022, DOER issued straw proposals of the code update, and Wellesley responded with comments. When DOER presented the final language for the updates in September, Wellesley, soon after, is when the Climate Action Committee and Select Board agreed to co-sponsor an article for town meeting. Next slide. So back to that pyramid. Next slide. We can see that because Wellesley's already a stretch code community, the update for the stretch code automatically applies in Wellesley. Next slide. The opt-in code, however, requires a town meeting vote. Next slide. This map shows what codes are in effect across Massachusetts. The white areas show where the base code is in effect. The light blue areas show the stretch code. That's about 300 communities and over 90% of Massachusetts population. And the dark blue areas in the inset, Watertown, Somerville, Brookline, and Cambridge, as well as Newton that adopted the opt-in last night, all of these towns have already adopted the opt-in code. Next slide. There's also, as you can see at the very over the pyramid at the very top, there's also another opportunity for communities, and that is a demonstration project that DOER has established for 10 communities. It's a fossil-free, fuel-free pilot for communities who are interested in prohibiting fossil fuel in new construction. Next slide. Several communities have signed up for this, and you can see there's even a waiting list. Next slide. Some details on the opt-in code. I'm going to take a first pass at this at a high level, and Ellen is going to fill in my gaps and get into sort of some more specifics about these. But to start us off, the opt-in code applies to new construction. It's consistent with emissions reduction goals at the state and local level. And as you'll see, key requirements in the opt-in code have to do with electric pre-wiring, solar, passive house, and an earlier start date for certain energy efficiency requirements. Next slide. So we'll start talking about residential. I'm going to start with low rise and then move to multifamily. Next slide. So you can see here, this chart is organized by energy source. These are all low rise residential buildings. So energy source, home size, and then a comparison of the stretch and opt-in code. Those light green boxes are there to highlight the key differences between the opt-in and the stretch. And remember, Wellesley's already under the stretch code, so it's really those opt-in differences that we're concerned with. You'll notice that for all electric new homes of any size, the stretch and the opt-in are the same, except for a timing difference I'm gonna leave to Ellen to explain. That has to do with when a certain energy efficiency requirement kicks in. Also, when we look at home additions and alterations, those are also under the stretch code. They're not covered by the opt-in. I want to turn your attention to the mixed fuel homes. Mixed fuel means that combustion is used in the home. And there's differences depending on the size of the home, under 4,000 square feet and over 4,000 square feet. However, for both of these sizes, if they are built to passive house standards, the only extra requirement under the opt-in code is wiring for electrification. That's designed to prepare these homes for future electrification, given that there's some combustion in them when they're built. So for example, if you put a gas dryer in the new home, you need to make sure there's enough electrical service to cover a future electric dryer. And you also have to supply a plug in the area of the dryer for a future electric dryer. If you are a home, if there's a home under 4,000 square feet that follows what's called the HERS pathway, that's a certain energy efficiency rating, you are required to do the wiring, but also add a certain amount of solar that Ellen's going to discuss in more detail. Let's look at the 4,000 square foot and over new home. In that case, if you follow the HERS pathway, again, it's solar and wiring that's required, but the solar in this case is larger. You have to supply enough solar to achieve net zero. That means the amount of solar on this home has to supply enough energy over the course of a year to power the home. Next slide. We're moving, okay, so this is showing new low-rise residential construction in Wellesley. The bar height indicates the number of new homes each year that are low-rise. The blue indicates where total living area is under 4,000 square feet. Orange is over 4,000 square feet. In recent years, 55 to 59% of low-rise new construction residential was over 4,000 square feet in Wellesley. Next slide. The next slide is on multifamilies. So these are large multifamilies, more than 4 stories, greater than 12,000 square feet. A key feature here is that both all electric and mixed fuel versions of these buildings must be passive house. The mixed fuel version has the added requirement of that wiring for electrification. Next slide. And this, yeah, one, I think 2 more, yeah. Okay, and so now we're going to talk about commercial. And next slide. And here we see the schools, offices, municipal buildings, and also other commercial buildings over 20,000 square feet. Again, with all electric, the stretch code and the opt-in have the same requirements essentially, except for that timing difference where we have some, well, actually that doesn't apply here because we're in ASHRAE and Teddy. So yes, so stretch code and opt-in are, you don't really have an extra opt-in requirement there. In mixed fuel, however, there is the wiring for electrification, and there is solar requirements as well, unless the house is designed to passive house standards. Next slide. And I'm just going to mention that there are incentives available at the federal, state, and local levels for the kinds of features we see in the opt-in code. So the weatherization, and well, also in the energy codes in general, in terms of weatherization, electrification, efficiency, and solar. And Wellesley has been in partnership with the Municipal Light Plant, our Climate Action Committee, Sustainable Wellesley. We have been running and will continue to run webinars as more incentives become available. Next slide. So before I pass it on to our panelists, I just hope that you do come away tonight understanding that the opt-in code is necessary for meeting our greenhouse gas emissions goals. It's very important for helping us to stop digging the fossil fuel hole by capturing that new construction, the lower hanging fruit. It helps avoid costly future retrofits because of that preparing for electrification in the future where mixed fuel is used. And in a lot of ways, the opt-in code promotes healthier, more comfortable indoor environments by encouraging electrification and also greater resilience, especially with regard to passive house. And now I'm going to pass it on to Ellen Watts.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Hello, everybody. My name is Ellen Watts. As Mary Beth mentioned, I am an architect and I've lived in Wellesley for 28 years. I'm speaking here tonight on behalf of myself, probably because of my experience designing net zero buildings and my steady effort to advance Massachusetts building energy codes for quite some time, since my appointment really in 2007 to co-chair the Massachusetts Governor's Zero Net Energy Buildings Task Force. And around that time, I was also part of the Wellesley Green Ribbon Study Committee that produced the first town greenhouse gas emissions inventory and recommended those 5-year reduction goals that Mary Beth was just highlighting. My goal is in just 3 slides to go into a little bit more detail about the provisions that Mary Beth just mentioned, pertinent to the opt-in code, address frequently asked questions, one of which has already appeared in the chat, thank you, and to highlight some good resources if you want to know more. So this first slide addresses the most frequently asked question, which is what are the stricter provisions of the opt-in code? In a nutshell, there are 5. Free wiring, solar PV, exemplary performance for large homes, ditto for large multifamily buildings, and getting a potential jump on the date when the lower home energy rating systems or HERS ratings come into effect. Let's talk about these very briefly in a little more detail. For mixed fuel buildings, the opt-in code says you must provide free wiring, including electrical panel service and outlets where those new elements would go for anything not electric from the get-go. That's space heating, water heating, any kind of appliance. This accelerates the clean energy transition, avoiding cost premiums to convert these buildings in the future. Important to say that without this provision, the cost, the time, the technical difficulty of retrofitting increases significantly, potentially diminishing property values, if not burdening future owners and tenants with undue expense. Next, solar PV. Mixed fuel buildings must provide rooftop solar generation in certain quantities, subject to exceptions for shading and passive house certification. Those quantities are a minimum of 4 kilowatts per dwelling unit for 1 and 2 family houses and townhouses, 0.75 watts per square foot of conditioned floor area for multifamily buildings, multifamily residential buildings, and 1.5 watts per square foot for each of the 3 largest floors of commercial buildings. As I'm sure you know, this partially offsets their greater emissions due to some on-site fossil fuel combustion, and it encourages all electric buildings while preserving fossil fuel, market choice to use fossil fuels for whatever purpose the property owner elects. There are exceptions for shaded sites and passive house certified structures. What is meant by shaded? If, as shown on the construction documents submitted to the town for permitting, the building has a potential solar zone area that is less than 300 square feet. And what is a potential solar zone area? That is a defined term, is the combination, all of the areas of any flat roofs, low sloped roofs, or steep sloped roofs oriented between 90 and 300 degrees of true north, where solar access is 70% or greater. In plain English, this means where south-facing roofs get shaded for more than 30% of the daylight hours annually. Shading elements that may limit solar access could include trees, landforms, adjacent buildings, or even self-shading by the building itself. Let's think about a higher wing over a lower one. Important to say, nothing in the opt-in code requires cutting down trees to enhance the potential solar zone area, thus in keeping with the tree bylaw. I hope this answers the question that was in the chat. Next point, exemplary performance for large multifamily. If using fossil fuel, for large homes, if using fossil fuels, I'm on the third point, dwellings greater than 4,000 square feet of conditioned area must be zero energy certified either by HERS zero or FIAS zero, that is completely offsetting with renewable energy, both their electricity and fossil fuel usage after first meeting the energy efficiency requirement of HERS 42. This offsetting renewable energy can be generated on-site or off-site. And as you can probably anticipate my saying, these exemplary performance standards, again, encourage these large homes to go all electric from the beginning. Phased in, starting July 1st, 2024, exemplary performance standards are also going to apply to large multifamily residential buildings. Many Massachusetts affordable housing projects are currently being developed to this standard, also market rate units, and the continued provision of Mass Save and Department of Housing and Community Development incentives will continue to make the production of housing of all types good and strong. Lastly, potential jump on lower HERS ratings. Depending on the town meeting vote and the elected effective date, there's an opportunity for municipalities to enforce the lower HERS ratings, 42 for all electric and 45 for mixed fuel, 6 to 12 months sooner for those communities opting in this year. Next slide. Beyond those real key provisions, I've been asked many, many questions and learned a lot from hearing those questions. The most frequently asked questions I've heard are these 5. Does the opt-in code apply to existing structures? Mary Beth has already answered that. No, it does not. It applies only to new construction. Additions and renovations, depending on their size, are regulated by the updated stretch code and the base code. Second question, will the opt-in discourage the creation of affordable housing? No, it will not, because of the continuing financial incentives through Mass Save and the competitive grants from the Department of Housing and Community Development. These make affordable housing development very attractive. And beyond that, we know that all electric buildings, from our town's experience with the new net zero schools, entail little, if any, additional construction costs and may even save money. Important to note that the result of high performance affordable housing is that it gives affordable housing residents significant health benefits and lower energy costs over time. Third question, is it possible to install a gas cooktop? Yes, absolutely. This would be a mixed fuel building and must meet the mixed fuel requirements, including the installation of electrical service and wiring for eventual conversion of all gas appliances to electric. Fourth, why adopt the opt-in code if there are only 5 main differences? The number one reason is that it requires pre-wiring, avoiding costly retrofits down the road for consumers that will eventually have to pay for it. It also has other requirements that importantly help us meet our climate goals. Additionally, early adopters may well be positioned to receive training, technical advice, and priority incentives. And lastly, why does this opt-in code permit fossil fuels? We thought the climate bill required a fossil-free net zero code. It turns out that according to the Federal Department of Energy, net zero definitions are all over the place. There's a compilation of 15 years worth of definitions. Not one of them controls fossil fuels or prohibits fossil fuels. And importantly, I think strategically it preserves market choice at a time when economic uncertainty is very high and utility pricing is very volatile, varying at this moment 300% from one Massachusetts community to another. So the provision of all electric and fossil fuel pathways is very strategic. And last slide, just briefly, for those who would like more resources, there are many, many more resources available at this moment than when the first stretch code was issued back in 2009. I have found these 4 particularly useful. The Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership has a frequently asked questions document and some comparative tables, one of which is excerpted over here on the right. might be most useful for practitioners. Next, the Boston Society for Architects has a critical stretch code series. The first was in January and was great for ramping up knowledge. And by the way, there's a very robust Q&A with DOER's Ian Finlayson, who is the primary author of this opt-in code. Next, the DOER summary documents are a heck of a lot easier to read than the codes themselves. I might refer you to those. They're on the DOER website. And lastly, many community presentations are full of information. I strongly recommend the Town of Wellesley's. I'm biased, but Mary Beth and Janet and others are just terrific, especially if you're talking with others in the community, such as town meeting members in your precinct. And for all of us, I think it's generally true. If you have a question, undoubtedly others will have had the same question or still have it, and these presentations address them. Now over to Hank Keating.
Thank you, Ellen. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Great. So I'm Hank Keating. I'm an architect. I'm a retired affordable housing developer. I'm currently the president of Passive House Massachusetts, have been for the last 4 years. And during that time, my primary activity has been advocacy for passive house and greenhouse gas reduction programs and regulations in the state of Massachusetts. I've been involved in passive house design for over 15 years, including designing the passive house that I live in, and I've produced, as a developer, over 400 units of affordable passive house projects. As you've seen, the code sections, both in the stretch code and the opt-in, have multiple passive house either requirements or alternative pathways. And that's led to a lot of people asking, so what is passive house? What really is it? And I'm going to start by saying that the diagram on the right makes it look too complicated. Passive house is actually simpler than that diagram. And it essentially, passive house is a set of metrics for evaluating a building design to determine that it will be able to function with literally 90% less heating energy than the typical code house. And that's not all energy. I'm going to focus on heating energy because that's the biggest issue we have in our construction in the Northeast, certainly. Literally, passive house can typically reduce that by 90%. In my house, it's more like 98%. And how is that accomplished? It's accomplished through airtight building envelopes. To give people a feel for that, the metric for air changes per hour in a passive house is 0.06. Code today, the new code is 3.0. The average house in New England that's maybe 10 or 20 years old is probably running between 10 and 20. So we're talking about serious airtight standards under passive house. That gets coupled immediately with balanced heat recovery ventilation. Once we make the house this tight, we need to be introducing ventilation continuously, 24/7. We introduce it to bedrooms and living rooms and dining rooms, and we pull it in a balanced way from kitchens and bathrooms. So we're constantly circulating fresh air through the house. People then often say to me, well, gee whiz, that sounds like it's awfully tight. What happens if your ventilation fails? You can always open the windows. It's no different than a regular house. So then the next primary point is continuous insulation without thermal bridging. This takes many forms, but it's safe to say that a passive house has higher levels of insulation than the typical code house. How much more varies tremendously by the building type. But hand in hand with the continuous insulation, we need high performance windows and double or triple pane. But high performance is not just a double pane window. It has to do significantly with the infiltration that that window contributes to the air tightness of the building. And all of these things taken together add up to requiring minimal space conditioning. That's where we're cutting the heating load by 90%. That means we can cut equipment by significant amounts. And that's where we can see a balance between what it might cost us to get a building more airtight and what it costs us to put in the equipment needed to heat it. The last point on this slide is optimization for solar gain. That is definitely a significant requirement for single family homes. I've got tremendous solar gain in my house. But what needs to be clear is that for multifamily housing, that is not an issue. And think about it. If you have an apartment building, you cannot have an apartment building with all southern facing windows. Some apartments are going to have north facing windows. It turns out that the smaller units we find in multifamily dwellings have much more heat gain per square foot from internal occupancy. They have much less heat loss because typically they might have one exterior wall out of 6 faces. So the internal heat gains from multifamily passive house are so significant that optimization of solar gain is no longer really an issue. Let's go to the next slide. So what are the benefits of it? Comfort is a great benefit, and it's one that's often not sold properly. Passive house produces a quiet building, really quiet. It produces a building that has no radiant cooling off of glass. So you never feel drafts and you never feel the radiant cooling off glass. It's comfortable in that the indoor air quality is better than any code house you've been in because it's constantly getting fresh air. It's a resilient house, and resilient both in terms of durability, the quality control required to do the airtight envelopes really assures that that building envelope is being properly constructed and is not going to suffer water and air leaks that can lead to mold and that type of thing, which we are accustomed to. The other aspect of resilience is that it can allow definitely for extended shelter in place. When the power goes out, you do not need to move out to Motel 6 because the house will be able to coast for probably, depending obviously on the outside weather, but 3 to 6 to 10 days. It's not unusual. Future proofing, yes. I mean, this goes along with the electrification where the codes are moving forward and the goals of the state for greenhouse gas reductions are requiring more and more that we build to something like a passive house standard. You build it today, you don't have the problem of having to retrofit in the future. And we'll go to the next slide to look at before getting financial feasibility, I just want to make a quick point. We have a tendency to think of passive house because of the name and a lot of the projects that are being built currently as housing only. It's not. It's schools, it's single family house, it's multifamily housing, and it's the largest commercial office building in the country being built to passive house standard right now in downtown Boston. Next slide, please. So when we started pushing for the Mass Save program and pushing DHCD to add bonus points into their scoring system for Passive House, the immediate concerns were cost. So working with the Mass CEC, we Clean Energy Center, we came up with a design challenge, and we funded 7, actually 8 projects to essentially to take the next steps to go to Passive House and document their additional costs. You can see here that there are multiple different types of buildings, and I would point you down to the left-hand corner for a moment, because you look at that, that's the highest cost increase and arguably the most complex geometry on the massing. That's a hint as to some of the things you can and should do to control cost on Passive House. Let's go to the next slide. So the average incremental cost under that study was 2%. And I would underscore that those are costs that were incurred effectively. They were documented in 2018 and incurred in the following 2 years. These are old costs. We are learning more and more how to build Passive House at no additional cost. So the fact that it cost only 2% on average, essentially 4 years ago, tells us we've come a long way. These are where you typically see cost increases are in ventilation upgrades, window and door upgrades, thermal bridging, and additional testing and verification. We save costs in the heating and cooling capacity of equipment, and we save costs by gaining the experience of design and construction teams in how to do this type of work. Every time we come up with new requirements on buildings, the cost to do it at first is higher than it is once the construction industry gets used to it. There's a great study that summarizes all the work done with this Mass CEC program that's mentioned here in the slide. Let's go to the next slide. This we don't really need to look at. This just shows you the types of buildings that were involved in that. Go to the next, please. And I think I'll end with this. So the Mass Save Passive House Incentive Program, which I understand is not available in Wellesley because you are a muni, but this tells you the story as to what's happening everywhere else. And that is that we started 4 years ago, essentially, with 98 units of Passive House multifamily available, having been completed in the state. And we currently have over 10,000 units registered for this Passive House Incentive Program. 40% of these are low-income projects, and frankly, that number is artificially depressed simply by the amount of Passive House, the amount of affordable housing funding that's available. If there were twice as many available, there would be twice as many involved in this production also. So we've proven that Passive House is financially feasible, and we are seeing massive amounts of units being produced. I think that's my last slide. Is that correct? Yes. Who are we handing this off to?
It's right here, Mark Dowdy. So, hello, can you guys all hear me? Yeah. Okay, so my name is Mark Dowdy, and I'm the president of ThoughtForms Custom Builders. And well, I guess I would say that all electric homes and high performance buildings have been a cause that I've been pursuing for years, because it's really an advantage to our clients. And Hank and some of the other speakers have mentioned some of the benefits associated with high performance in all electric buildings. So I'll try and run through this without covering too many of the points that they've already hit on. Really three main things that we've seen in the last 25 years of building high performance buildings. Favorable economics, healthier for the folks who live in the homes, and then more comfortable and safer. So the favorable economics point, Hank had just cited that Mass CEC study that was done. The Rocky Mountain Institute's also done a study that shows between 1% and 3% upfront cost premiums. And then some of our own projects internally where we've done analyses for clients to determine whether, what's the investment required upfront. We're seeing that same 1% to 3% premium. Now, that premium is balanced by operating cost savings, 60% to 100% reduction in utility costs. So when we're building homes that are HERS negative, so they actually generate more energy than they use, we're seeing people obviously have no utility bills. And I'll just pause for a moment, because we've been using this term HERS rating, or home energy rating system, quite a bit tonight. And for folks who aren't familiar with what that is, if you think of it like a sticker on your car with miles per gallon on a car, a HERS rating is a metric. It's a measurement that tells you how the home performs relative to a standard. So the reference home would be 100, so that's 100%. And then a HERS rating of, let's say, 40 means that it uses 40% of the energy of the reference home. So what we're seeing is when we're building homes, single-digit HERS rating, clients are saving quite a bit of money on their utility costs and not much of an upfront premium. It was also mentioned earlier that resale premium. So what we're hearing from realtors and economists is that these homes that are built to this high performance and all electric standard will have a higher resale value in 15 or 20 years than a home that's built mixed fuel or is less efficient. And then there's the potential additional incentives that Mary Beth mentioned up front. So really the economics, I think when we present this information to clients and we give them the backup data and the research, it tilts them towards high performance all electric homes. The healthier side, as Hank was mentioning, you have fewer air infiltration problems where you get, I grew up in an old home and it had a stone foundation, and you could go down in the basement in the daytime and you could see the light from the outside through some of those holes in the foundation. And what happens is air leaks into your house. Then when you hear people say it's great, houses need to breathe, what a high performance home does is it breathes through a mechanical system where you're filtering the air that's coming in. In the old home I grew up in, the air, it was breathing, but it was coming in through the same holes in the foundation and other parts of the building that mice and other things were coming in through. So that's how you get cleaner air in the houses. And then you also maintain a stable humidity and temperature. So what you end up there is you don't get really dry where you get dust mites, and you don't get really moist where you get mold. So you can create a healthier indoor environment there. And then finally, if you're in the all electric world, you're not introducing combustion gases into the building, particularly in the kitchen. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen recently, the New York Times has run some articles on it. But going back 10, 15 years ago, there was studies out of the University of Texas and more recently out of Stanford that were documenting and measuring the air quality inside a house. The University of Texas study was actually pretty shocking, because what they found was the air inside your home when you're preparing, let's say, a Thanksgiving meal or a big dinner, the air that was inside your home, if you took that outside, the government would be required to give a warning under the Clean Air Act because of the quality of the air. So we don't really measure the air quality inside of our homes typically, yet Americans spend about 90% of their time indoors. So the movement towards high performance all electric buildings is actually, it's a very positive thing for homeowners. And then the comfort and safety, as Hank mentioned, fewer drafts, the stable humidity. A lot of folks in New England get dry sinuses or skin in the winter. Having that stable humidity is clearly a benefit in those instances. You reduce the solar heat gain in the summer because of the high performance windows. And then if you have kids in the house, you don't have open flames or hot cooktops, and also just less heat in the kitchen. So I think the really important point that I think is, these three benefits that I've kind of gone into detail on. A lot of people say, okay, well, but I don't want to have to make a big sacrifice in terms of the architecture or the way the house feels. And the thing is that a high performance all electric home doesn't really feel different. And it's the only observable difference would be there's no gas cooktop or gas fireplace. So you want to hit the next slide, please? So when I talk to clients through, again, we've been talking about this for a long time. Some of the misperceptions that I think people have, the high performance costs more. We've talked about that quite a bit tonight. Another, so I won't go into that anymore, but another one is electric homes are uncomfortable. I think where some of this misperception comes from is when people think of an electric home, they're thinking of the electric baseboard or forced hot air that you saw in the 1970s. And that was uncomfortable. But the current technology with the air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps, very comfortable and healthier. Another misperception is electric homes are expensive to operate. Again, if you look back in time, electric resistance heating, like those electric baseboards, and electric hot water, resistant hot water, they are inefficient and they're expensive. But the current technology, very efficient, and homes built to this standard need less energy to start with. All electric technology is unproven. Well, the heat pump was patented in the 1940s. The gas burner was patented sometime in the 1920s. They're both well-established technologies. The US has been late to adopt the heat pump technology. It's been used extensively in Europe and Asia, and it works well. This one, the real cooks avoid induction cooktops. So if you've never looked at an induction cooktop, I think it's worth it. And I know that Miele has a showroom right down in Wellesley Square, and they're happy to show you how well it works. I have a friend who was a chef in Seattle, and before he got hired into the restaurant, one of the requirements he put, and he's a pretty fancy chef, and one of the requirements he made on joining that restaurant was that they switched to induction because it was more comfortable in the kitchen. You weren't burning your shirt or burning your hands on the cooktops, and they did keep a few gas burners for dishes they needed to prepare with flame. So another one, grid can't support all electric, so it's a risk of power interruption. And this one I actually hear quite a bit where people say, oh, if everybody got an electric car tomorrow, or if every house went to all electric tomorrow, the grid couldn't support it. And that's true. If everything happened tomorrow, the grid couldn't support it all tomorrow. But if you look outside of the home industry and you look at what's going on in the utility industry, the grid is transitioning in parallel with buildings. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. I guess the other one would be that high performance and all electric homes are ugly. So I thought just quickly to end my section here, we can go through a few slides. So the next slide. So here we have high performance or all electric. And the question here is, can you tell, is this a high performance or an all electric home? And you might look and say, well, it's a lot of glass and gee, I don't know. But this one is a high performance home. It does have a gas cooktop, but this one has a very low HERS rating, and it's down in the Cape on the shore, and lots of windows to take advantage of the view. Next slide, please. This one here, all electric high performance. This one was a renovation that we did of a home in Lexington, and again, very, very low HERS rating. I believe this one was around 20. And uses a ground source heat pump. So you don't actually have any condensers in the yard. So there's no noise from the condensers, and they aren't visible in the landscape. So this home was set in a nice little lot, really peaceful lot, quiet, and it's a renovation. So renovations can meet these standards as well as new construction. And I know tonight we're focused on new construction for the opt-in, but I thought it would be helpful for folks to see what can be done in a renovation setting. Next slide. Okay, so this one, I know this one well because this is my house, and we actually generate about 70% more energy than we use. And so this one is high performance and all electric. We have a plug-in car. We haven't paid a utility bill since we moved in 2014. And I can say from experience that we have had no, we love the home, no compromise associated with being all electric. And it's been a great experience. Next slide. This one here, This one is actually a net zero. So it's, I believe there's a -1 HERS rating on this home. You can see, again, lots of windows. So I think to Hank's point earlier, you know, there's no single architectural style that you'll see that's associated with high performance. It's really in the details and the care and the construction. You know, I can keep going on. I'll put up one more. And this one here, I'm actually, I'm just going to leave this one as a visual and let Tom Catalano, if Tom is next, I think Tom will have some things to say about this one. This is a home that we worked on with Tom. And again, a lot of care put into the indoor air quality in this home. One particular thing I recall from this project was that the ventilation of the primary dressing closet, we had additional ventilation there because the homeowner, they had to wear suits to work like some people do. And with the dry cleaning, they wanted to make sure that they were getting all of the residual chemicals from the dry cleaning out of the indoor environment. So we actually put extra ventilation in that dressing room for them. And again, this goes into, I think, the thought and care of working with professionals who really understand this and who are focused on what's going to be in the client's best interest and presenting the clients with information. So at the end of the day, folks can decide for themselves what they want to build and what they value. So in case you can't tell, I'm a fan. I've given testimony at the State House on all electric legislation and spoken to town meetings in Lexington and Acton and Arlington, and now privileged to be here tonight speaking to you all and available for any questions. But I'll turn it over and thank you for listening in.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thanks to all of our speakers. And we do have Tom Catalano waiting in the wings, but I do know that I think we could stop the slide sharing for a few moments so we can just take a break before we get back to Tom, because I know there's some questions piling up and I don't see any hands raised right now. So we can go through some of the chat questions, but please feel free to raise your hand if you want to jump in and ask a question live. Welcome that. And we will be distributing the slides so that the links that you see in the slide deck will be available when we send around those materials. So Tom Stagliano has some questions about solar, and I don't think we have anyone from the MLP here tonight, but one of your questions, I believe, has to do with, well, the question of solar panels, who maintains these over time, and the panels, if solar panels are required, who maintains these over time? And then there's a question about net metering. So I can just quickly take the net metering question. You know, if the MLP does offer, I'm going to read from their website. The MLP offers residential customers full retail value net metering credited monthly for systems up to 10 kilowatts, single phase, or 25 kilowatts, 3-phase. And the credit is issued on your utility bill monthly. However, I don't know if anyone wants to jump in here, but I do think there's some caveats to how much sort of, you know, whether you can actually do a really oversized system. I'm not sure that is in the cards, but I don't want to get into details on your own. If there's an MLP expert over here on here today, I welcome him to chime in about that. In terms of the solar panels, I mean, I think that these are something that the homeowner would be putting on the home and then in charge of maintaining over time if we're talking about private homes. And when we get into commercial buildings, that's, you know, and nonprofit buildings, that's another story that requires engagement with the MLP on the details of that. And then there's also a question, if new homes or buildings must be pre-wired for all electric, is there a minimum of 200 amps per unit? And does anyone want to jump in on that? I mean, I can take a stab at that. Generally, when you look at an electrified home, I think 200 amps is sort of the minimum that you need if you're going to be having your heating system and your appliances and an electric vehicle. I think that 200 amps is sort of the general baseline that you need. So that a lot of, if you are renovating, you generally have to upgrade from 100 amp service. And then there's the question about when the increased amperage is added across the town, where will Wellesley MLP get the increased required electricity? So we get this, Mark brought this up. We get this question a lot in terms of electrical capacity. Beneficial electrification is something that the MLP is looking at on a daily basis. They're very aware of the capacity the increased capacity needs that are coming down the road. And they are, I think, have every confidence that they will meet those. There's many strategies that they are applying to make sure that Wellesley is set up for widespread electrification. And that involves, looking at the infrastructure, battery storage, and also things like bringing distributed solar online is going to help to kind of modify, or what's the word, help us to help to ameliorate in some ways the demand, because if the solar is going to have to help to offset that. The MLP is also engaging in a lot of demand response work, so that the more that we can move our demand off the peak times, the peak energy demand times, that also helps. And there's lots of different strategies for that, ranging from voluntary demand response activity to automated demand response activity. So there's a lot going on, but the MLP is very much aware and on board with working on this problem. It's not, I shouldn't call it a problem. It's a, just these changes, this transformation. Okay, so we have from Jean Mail. Does anyone have suggestions for converting an antique home or name and number to contact? Jean, let's take that question offline because that's a little bit specific and it's focused on renovation rather than sort of the new construction that's focused on the opt-in code, but thank you for your question.
And Mary Beth, I would add that there was another later related question if renovations at any point would trigger the specialized code requirements. And the answer is no. Renovations and alterations, they're covered under the stretch code.
Great. And Mary and Janet, actually, do you have have you found questions on the chat that we should float?
Mary Beth, if I could just quickly go back and add to a couple of points you made.
One on please. Yeah. What am I doing? Like
no, that's fine. The question on this, the maintenance on solar, I just wanted to note that we've got solar on probably a dozen homes that we've built, as well as on our office and our wood shop. And in all the years we've had solar, we've had one panel that broke on our shop unexpectedly. And so I think that the maintenance we've observed, at least in our experience, has been very low. So just as a reference point. And the second thing was on the question about what's Wellesley doing about the potential or the increasing load in terms of electricity. And just going back to the chart you had showed earlier, which the number of housing starts in Wellesley over the years. And at a quick glance, it looks like, there's somewhere around 40 new homes per year on average. And that's just a very quick glance. So you're really talking about adding 40 homes. And even in that, you're talking about the incremental electrification of those 40 homes, because those homes are going to use electricity. And we're just talking about that incremental difference. So I think that the ramp up time for the municipal light plant to keep moving on this, they're just, again, trying to just create some perspective based on the data that's been shared tonight.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Anyone else? I invite the experts to weigh in here on anything else. And Janet and Mary, was there any?
Yeah, there's a question about fireplaces. Do you block off a fireplace?
I would say for passive house, effectively, you cannot have a fireplace. You can. I'm sorry, I'm going to correct myself. When we started, you couldn't have one. Now you can, but there's a premium for doing it because you have to supply fresh air directly to it that's preheated. You can't bring in cold air. So you have to have an entirely different system providing fresh air to a wood burning fireplace that preheats the air and feeds the fire and then is sucked up the flue. One thing that probably, I think most people in New England kind of understand that fireplaces are a net heating loss across the year. They simply leak air out of them constantly. So that's, like the gas stove, that's something that people have to wrap their head around. Can they live without a fireplace, or are they willing to pay the expense to add in a specific air feeding ventilation system for that or not? And I would just say, when I faced that issue, I put in an ethanol alcohol burning fireplace that only produces CO2 and water vapor. So you don't need a flue for that. You can work with that. You get a very nice flame and it's not quite as hot as a wood flame. There are options, but it's like the gas stove. People have to come to grips with that. There are some compromises.
Thank you. So if we don't have any immediate questions, maybe this is a good time for Tom Catalano to jump on and we can quickly go through some of his slides.
There's one more question that we should address. And I think it's been partially addressed, but Janet King was wondering, are the many windows considering the poor insulation with glass always well offset by the energy saved by the entire building? I'm assuming she's referring to some of the pictures shared by Mark with, all these lovely windows.
I would jump in here also quickly and point to the image I showed of the Winthrop Center office building. It's an all glass office tower. It's meeting the passive house standard. It's triple glazing. And, when it was proposed, I said, I need to pinch myself. Can we really do this? And it's demonstrated that we can. We can achieve these levels with the new triple glazing, and we can do it. It's a little harder to do it, and you have to probably pay a penalty and some additional insulation elsewhere to make up for that gap loss, but it's doable.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I'd like to add to what Hank just said, having studied energy models and building designs, and particularly window optimization for about 25 years. What you notice is that there's a sweet spot. About 35% of the total perimeter being glazed is optimal if the windows are distributed with thought to where is south, where you want the most windows, where can you stand to have some north and east, and where should you carefully control, and that is for west. In addition, as Hank is suggesting, glazing specifications are extremely important, and windows have become better and better and better. It used to be impossible to find a thermally broken frame that wasn't just a metal radiator to the outside, but now you can. There are all kinds of choices, operable and fixed. And so it's a question of design. And of course, I'm an architect, so I would say that, but that's the real answer.
And I guess if I throw in one more point there, we've done renovations of mid-century modern homes, which are known for having lots and lots of glass. And just to echo what Hank and Ellen have said, is the technology and the glazing units that are available today, you can really, really go a long way towards an efficient home with a high performance IGU or insulated glass unit. So.
Very interesting. Okay, so do you think, Janet and Mary, do you think it's okay to move back to slides?
Yep.
Okay, so I think the next slide might be the start of Tom's slide deck. Yep.
Thank you, Mary Beth. What I really hope to just get across one point tonight, and that is to get people to understand that the requirements needed to meet the HERS levels suggested for the all-electric home are not particularly onerous. I think that people and they don't come with any particular aesthetic constraints. This is an example of some of the points of sustainable project that we're doing right now. It's somewhat contemporary, but it has it hits the high performance building requirements, the livability, the solar orientation. And one point I would like to make to people to consider, in the 18th century, when we didn't have the choice of electrification or fossil fuels, you didn't have a choice. You had to design a house and you had to orient a house to take advantage of the sun and to site it with most of the glass on the south side. If you look at a typical New England salt box, there's a reason that they were configured that way. They wanted to take advantage of south-facing glass and minimize northern exposure and north-facing glass. Next slide, please. You'd seen this picture earlier, but this is an example of a house that could easily meet the requirement of HERS 42 for an all-electric structure. It's obviously a larger than 4,000 square foot house, but this house has been essentially all electric, with the exception, and this is the case for projects. I think the big pinch point for people will be giving up their gas cooking and putting some faith in the heat pump water heating systems, or a hybrid of a heat pump and solar and water. Because other than that, this building is essentially an all-electric building. It has a ground source heat pump. It has a very high indoor environmental quality design. As Mark said, we have negative pressure in some of the spaces too. Client was very sensitive about perchlorides that we had to get out of the space. Next slide, please. This is another project in Dover, Mass, which has a large capacity 41 kW solar system on the barn, and that generates a substantial amount of electricity for another high efficiency earth coupled heat pump system. And the earth coupled heat pump is very similar to the air source heat pump, just that rather than circulating outside air over the coils, we're circulating groundwater through a heat exchanger and then extracting or putting heat back into the ground at various times of the year. Next slide, please. This is another example of a house that is just a different set of style options, really, but it's a house that's heated by air source heat pumps, very high efficiency, very high performance glazing. I know one of the questions was about the glass. The HERS model, like everything, is a series of trade-offs. You're trading, the more glass you have as you work to develop your model and get the rating that you want, can be offset by less glass on the less desirable exposures, but also more insulation. And you also have the option, as Mark said, of going from double glazing to triple glazing, which greatly reduces the energy loss through the glass. Next slide, please.
Damn chimney.
And then this is a project actually on Cliff Road in Wellesley that is also heated by an air source heat pump. One of the benefits you have in much of Wellesley is you have access to three-phase power, which for when you can do it, it allows for more efficient machinery, smaller pumps, smaller electric consumption. And this house has a air source heat pump that heats and cools the building. And again, if we were to take out the gas-fired domestic hot water heater and the gas cooking appliance in this project's about 5 or 6 years old, we would be able to qualify without making any other changes. Also, big point Hank raised, and this is the case here, elimination of the gas burning fireplaces or any fireplaces, but this client may have been okay with that. But a few minor sacrifices in how they would use the house with the change in the cooking, and it would pass this new code easily. Thank you. I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Tom. And I think that I think that's it for the slides, so we can take those down. Thank you very much, Janet, for that work in advancing them. And Alan, I wondered if you could chime in a little bit, because the opt-in code, of course, is going to, it applies to new construction, large commercial buildings. We've been talking a lot about homes, but I wondered if you could talk a little bit. One of the questions I get a lot is, what about our new schools? Would they be in line? Of course, they're being constructed. They were designed and constructed before the opt-in code is in place, but do the specifications of those new schools align with what the opt-in code is prescribing in terms of all electric buildings?
Well,
and of course, I mean, I need to clarify something. I'm sorry. Okay. As Ellen has made very clear, there is a choice. It's absolutely fine. You are absolutely allowed to put combustion equipment in these buildings under the opt-in code. And I having my bias come through a little bit too much. But clearly there's a choice there, and combustion is possible under the opt-in code. I just want to make that point. But okay, so thank you, Alan.
So Mary Beth, did you say Ellen or Alan?
Alan.
Alan, okay. Just wanted to be sure I wasn't speaking for somebody else. Well, I think for the new Honeywell and new Hardie, they're 100% electric buildings, and I don't think there's really a question there of whether that they need to be, I guess, prepped for a whole new electric system, because they're designed as it is to be 100% electric. But our older buildings, some of the very old buildings, relatively speaking, are definitely not designed to be converted to 100% electric. Although they could be. I mean, they could be in the sense that a renovation is possible. It would require new electric service, require new switchgear, require, the air handling equipment would have to be changed because a lot of it's gas fired in town. So we haven't really considered that as something, as a function of what FMD is doing. I think the closest building maybe that we have would be the new high school. That might be most easily converted to 100% electric because the service itself is fairly large. Yeah, so I'm sorry I don't have more to offer on that, but I can certainly look into it and get back to you with more information if you'd like.
That's okay, Alan. I think it's just interesting to mention that we do have these all electric schools coming on, right, and they have solar. And so that they're, they're net zero ready. And I think it's because we hear, I do get questions about that when we talk about the code, is especially with our new schools, because those are the new construction buildings that are in the pipeline right now. I'd
like to look into that more thoroughly for you and speak to you separately if I could, because it's an interesting area, and I'm getting a lot of good information from the panelists tonight. This is an area that we haven't touched upon. Well, I haven't touched upon. My work is mostly on energy conservation and project managing energy conservation projects. So we're doing a good job with that, but this seems like it's the next step. So yeah, I want to be prepared for it.
Yeah, that's great, Alan. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
sure.
you.
Though just to note that those are existing buildings, and under the current opt-in code would not be required to meet any of those specifications for the opt-in code.
Right. You mean, okay. The
existing buildings that he was speaking about needing new services. So the new Hardie and Honeywell schools are new, but when he was unsure about what would need to be done for the other buildings that are older, those would be considered renovations and would be not be subject to the specialized code.
Just to add to that, Town Hall and Warren will be 100% electric buildings. That's something that's in the works right now. Town Hall, I think, is moving ahead. They're really making some impressive progress in Wellesley with respect to their buildings. My guess is at some point, you'll just see a wave go through from older building to new, or maybe newer to old, where they're going to be a conversion to 100% electric.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, that's very
Thank-
impressive. That's
Yep.
very impressive. So I don't see any hands raised. And Mary and Jen, do you have anything? I do have some questions that have come up in in conversations with some building professionals and some community members in terms of, let's see, I'm just reviewing my questions because our panelists have really actually been proactive about addressing a lot of these.
I do have one question, Mary Beth, again from
Sure.
Janet. She's wondering if the chimneys are used for exhaust. I'm not sure if she's speaking about new buildings or existing buildings.
I think that question came up when Tom was showing the picture of the home on Cliff Road. So maybe Tom, if you want to.
It was Weston and Dover. There were two big houses. And I noticed with a big lawn in front of them, very big houses, and they had two chimneys, big, tall brick chimneys.
The chimneys, they were used to exhaust the fireplaces, but to actually do the exhaust that Hank's talking about, it's through two separate wall vents. So the intake and the exhaust for the energy recovery ventilator system typically is through a sidewall, through one of the walls, and not through a vertical opening.
So these chimneys were probably blocked, or fireplaces with them were then blocked.
Yes, yeah. As we discussed, and as Hank said, if you're trying to achieve the passive house standard, you'll have to say goodbye to a fireplace, and they're very hard to seal. And even under the best circumstances, when you do the blower door testing, the fireplace is likely to be the Achilles heel of the project.
Yeah.
It's been done. It's been done. So if you have the money, the patience, and the commitment, you can do a fireplace with passive house, but you have to have all three ingredients.
Yeah, we've done a home with a fireplace that was not certified passive house, but was essentially a passive house in its concept and execution. And like you said, Hank, it just takes someone who's really committed to the idea that they want that fireplace. We didn't put one in my home, and it was as much a cost issue because just the cost of putting in a fireplace, we were looking at the budget and we decided we didn't need it.
Yeah, ethanol alcohol, give it a try. I've also proven you can burn Jack Daniels in it. It smells good when you do.
And Philippa is raising her hand too. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Quick question. These huge big houses are wonderful. I have heard that HERS score, I'd like someone to explain it to me, that actually it's easier to get a good score in a large home, and that seems questionable to me, if that really is right or fair. So I wonder if that's correct, if it's statistically biased towards large homes, and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so that one I know so Philippa, you heard correctly that the way it was previously calculated, there was a benefit to the air infiltration ratings on a larger home because of the surface area to the volume of the home. That calculation, it's my understanding, has been revised to take into account the size of the home as we're doing it now. And Hank might know for certain, but I know I spoke to a HERS rater recently who said that has been revised. I just haven't looked at the calculation or looked at it personally.
I'm glad to hear that if that's the case.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure about that calculation either, but I can tell you that there is the physics of building that says if you try to build a tiny house as a passive house, literally a tiny house that's 10 by 12, it's very difficult to do it. It's harder. But when we talk about a normal house of 1,200 feet, of 1,800 feet, 2,000 square feet, it's not an issue. It's not a big challenge. It's not much more challenging for those. And there's plenty of Habitat for Humanity passive houses that have been built that are modest homes, and they can achieve this standard without difficulty.
Great. One of the questions I heard from folks was just a dislike of the mini split aesthetics. And so I wondered if you could just talk about, Tom or Nick, if you wanted to jump in here, and some of these luxury homes. Do you want to explain what kind of a system is in there with the heat pumps, and whether when you talk about heat pumps, you're talking about something on the wall or something that's ducted?
I'll try and answer that. The technology is the same. The mini split, everyone's seen them. They're the wall mounted rectangular units that have a direct discharge air supply. The typical projects that we've been doing, clients would, if they had their druthers, would actually, they enjoy the technology, but they don't enjoy the look of the mini split. So the companies that make the mini splits also make mini ducted units. So it's essentially the guts of the mini split without the plastic cover. You put it in a plenum space, and you connect a duct for the supply and a duct for the return. So it functions as any other typical air handler in a typical building. And the advantage of the ducted unit in the mini split type of system, the VRF type of system, is you can also opt for more sophisticated filtration. Whereas in the mini splits, you have a set filtration level, and with the ducted units, you can actually opt for a higher level of filtration if you're trying to remove particulates or indoor pollutants.
Thank you. Nick, did you want to jump in on that as well?
Yeah, it's usually a mix, like on the high performance homes. A lot of times, if people don't like the aesthetics, we'll use ducted in the like main living spaces, but in like a basements or in like storage areas, or you don't necessarily need to. It costs a little bit more to run the ducting. So a lot of times, even in the nice custom homes we build, you'll put a ductless unit. Ducted, just like a wall mounted unit in like their gym or their workout space. So there's, you can mix them up. It doesn't have to be one or the other. They're not mutually exclusive. So.
Yeah, and there's one thing, another option there also, in addition to that. All the major companies have a cassette. It's called a cassette style unit. So it looks like a slightly larger bathroom fan, mounts in the ceiling, no ducts. It's a single piece unit. Does the same function as the wall unit, and it's quite easy to put in. Fits in the standard joist bay.
Great. Another question for the builders and the architects is, do you, when you first engage with a client, are you finding that the clients are seeking out these high performance buildings, or do you have a role in sort of informing the client and kind of opening their eyes to these type of building technologies?
It's actually, if I could take a quick.
Go ahead, Mark.
We've at times debated whether or not we as a company should take a stand and say we're only doing all electric homes. And the reason we haven't is because, that would put us on one end of sort of a polarized discussion in society. And what we've found is that by approaching every project and just providing clients with information, we've achieved some really good outcomes. And those folks in the middle who want more comfortable, they want the cost benefit, they want the safer and healthier environment, but they don't know. And so we'll come to a project and there's a preliminary design which has a lot of gas-fired appliances in it. We just sit down and we explain to the client the trade-offs. And we have seen, probably in the last 5 years, we've probably seen 7 or 8 projects come to us with a gas-fired system, gas cooking stove, snow melt on the driveway. And by the time we've had these upfront conversations, they've shifted to all electric. So I think that there is a big education gap. And that was part of why I presented that slide on perceptions in the market, is because it's really hard for people to sift through the anecdotes, the outdated information and all that, and make a decision that's in their own best interest, you know, and make it based on good information.
Mhm. Thank you.
Mary Beth, I'd like to add that in 2019, the American Institute of Architects passed a resolution at its annual convention recognizing the climate emergency, and importantly, making it an ethical obligation of architects to make their clients aware of the financial and the health and the technical benefits of designing for the 21st century. And going one step further, past the principles for designing in the 21st century, which is everything we've been talking about tonight. All electric buildings, exchange of heat recovery from exhaust air, triple glazing, key attention to passive solar principles, as well as active solar generation. So I'm glad for your question. I think leadership has preceded the declaration, but I just wanted to make it clear that for all many tens of thousands of architects, it's kind of a new era.
Yeah, for us, it's the default. It's the default. We start with the idea of the all-electric project because we know it's ultimately more efficient and in the end is going to cost less for the client to run it. One of the, not to get into the weeds too much, but I think people have a lot of misnomers out there about the all-electric buildings. Because as Mark said, they're going back, people at my age at least are going back to their experience as a kid living in a house with electric baseboards. One of the things that we get out of this, the heat pump technology, is a way to actually have almost like you're multiplying the energy. So these units are measured but with a metric called the coefficient of production. Any of the typical resistance or gas or any of the fossil fuels, they're not 100% efficient. So for every unit of energy you put in, you're getting slightly less than 1 unit of energy out of the machine. Whereas the heat pumps have a multiplier effect. So for every unit of energy you're putting in to the machine, the heat pump actually can give you 3 units of energy and more out. So we actually strongly encourage our clients to consider it, and most clients do. And I think more and more people are familiar with it now, and it's not as hard of a push to get them to think about it and the benefits it has for them.
Very helpful. Thank you, Tom. We're getting very close to 8:30 right now. And so I think I'm gonna close us out because unless Janet and Mary, do you have some pressing questions? Before we were jumping on the webinar, Joanne Becerra from DOER was mentioning, that there is quite a bit of buzz about this, these updated energy codes and the opt-in and the demonstration project. And I think, and someone just wrote in the chat who was Wendy Beck was just mentioning it's been inspirational. And I think it is inspirational. And I think that this is one climate change story that's really hopeful. And it does, and I think we need that in this day and age with climate change and everything else that's going on. And so it is very inspirational and uplifting to be able to talk about technologies that can help us out of this problem that we are in, this challenge that we're facing. And I want to thank all of our panelists because you are leaders in this area. You are really key actors in moving us forward on climate change, and that's the architects and the builders and Joanne, the policymakers. Alan, who's been working his tail off to move us in this direction as a municipality. So, I just want to thank you all for being here tonight. I want to thank all of our community members for showing up and being part of this conversation. So, I hope you're coming away with a good impression of the opt-in code, and I encourage you to get in touch with your town meeting members because they are the votes that are going to decide whether we get to have this code in Wellesley. So thank you so much, and please be in touch with our Climate Action Office office with any questions or ideas. We look forward to hearing from you.